What if 4 missiles could wipe out an entire Russian ammunition fortress before the defenders even knew what was happening?
At 10:34 p.m. on July 2, 2025, the calm over eastern Donbas tore open without warning. The first Vilkha-M blasted out of its launch tube, sending a 48-meter column of heat into the sky, bright enough to illuminate the shells of abandoned farmhouses nearly 2 kilometers away. Within 3 seconds, every Russian radar inside a 55-kilometer radius detected the launch signature. The Ukrainian crew did not pause. The gunner was already preparing the next shot. A deep vibration rolled across the fields. Sharp, metallic, unnatural. It wasn't thunder. It was the rising howl of Russian 9 M55K rockets accelerating past 1,150 meters per second, fired from a Smerch battery that had locked onto their earlier harassment volley. Their 6-minute reaction window had collapsed. Now they had under 4 minutes before impact. At 10:34 p.m., the second Vilkha-M roared upward, its exhaust blast shaking loose window frames in a row of empty storage sheds nearby. Thermal warnings flashed amber, then red. The crew was overriding every firing guideline in the manual, but at that point, procedure no longer mattered. Survival did. Inside the cabin, the driver kept the 8x8 transporter engine pushed to 2,300 RPM, ready to launch the vehicle forward the instant the 4th missile cleared the rails. But the crew chief leaned closer and gave a calm but urgent order. 2 more, no delays. Outside, the incoming rockets were now loud enough to hear with absolute clarity, meaning they were less than 90 seconds from the strike zone. The battlefield had become a collision course between 2 storms, Ukraine's precision salvo racing east and Russia's retaliation screaming west. Only one side's timing would decide everything. If you were sitting in that cabin, would you risk launching all 4 or escape before the incoming rockets reached you? 4 minutes earlier, at 10:30 p.m., the night had been quiet enough for the Ukrainian crew to believe they were still running a routine fire mission. Their Vilkha-M was positioned along a shallow tree line, its launcher elevated toward a Russian ammunition depot nearly 61 kilometers away. They had completed a short harassment volley just 17 minutes before, standard practice to keep Russian gunners uncomfortable. Then the radar operator froze. His passive receiver lit up with a pattern he had been trained to fear, the sweeping rising frequency signature of the Zoopark 1M, Russia's counter-battery radar. The signal strength indicated it was scanning from roughly 39 kilometers out, close enough to map their firing position within 28 to 32 seconds. In an instant, the mission shifted from fire and relocate to a fight for survival. The crew chief leaned forward, eyes locked on the monitor. "This isn't a normal sweep," he muttered. The Zoopark's pattern was tightening. That meant Russia had not only detected the earlier volley, they were calculating coordinates right now. Based on known Russian doctrine, an MLRS response from a Smerch unit could be initiated in under 6 minutes, sometimes as fast as 4.5 when crews were at high readiness. That was exactly the situation tonight. At 10:31 p.m., Ukrainian electronic warfare monitors reported a sharp rise in GPS interference, not high enough to break navigation, but enough to hint that Russia was preparing for a targeting solution. The gunner's tablet flickered once, then stabilized. It was the first warning that the strike they were preparing would not be clean. The crew chief made the decision. "We launch first. Everything else comes after." At 10:32 p.m., the electromagnetic environment around the Vilkha-M crew shifted violently. Russian jammers operating from multiple sites, likely a mix of R330 ZHG-TEL and Pol 21 nodes, increased output, pushing interference across at least 5 GPS frequency bands. Signal-to-noise ratios fell from 38 decibels per hertz to 12 decibels per hertz, low enough to destabilize the gunner's targeting tablet. The screen flickered twice, losing satellite lock for 1.4 seconds, then returning with degraded accuracy. The gunner quickly switched from automated verification to manual input mode, where every coordinate required an independent checksum. Under normal conditions, this process took 3 minutes and 20 seconds for 4 missiles. Tonight, they had barely 90 seconds. A single error beyond plus or minus 3.8 meters could cause a miss significant enough to waste the entire operation. Meanwhile, thermal sensors registered multiple heat plumes from the northeast. Russian 9M55K rockets had already launched, confirming the Smerch unit's rapid response. Traveling at 1,150 to 1,180 meters per second, the rockets would reach Ukrainian lines in just under 3 minutes and 50 seconds. The clock was no longer theoretical. It was lethal. Inside the launcher, temperatures rose sharply. Each Vilkha-M missile required controlled spacing between shots to prevent structural stress. Doctrine recommended 45 seconds between launches. The crew was forcing it down to 30 to 32 seconds. Heat shielding on the left launch tubes began showing minor stress fractures, detected by onboard diagnostics at 10:33 p.m. By 10:34 p.m., despite jamming and rising thermal alarms, the first 2 missiles were fully programmed and airborne. The third missile was moments from ignition. The fourth would follow, if the launcher held together long enough. At 10:41 p.m., the first Vilkha-M missile descended through 6,200 meters, crossing into the engagement envelope of Russia's Tor M2 battery, positioned roughly 14.8 kilometers east of the depot. Tor surveillance radar locked onto the missile within 5.3 seconds, focusing nearly 620 kilowatts of radiated power onto its reduced radar cross-section. The operator initiated the first firing sequence, launching a pair of 9M338K interceptors. Each interceptor accelerated past Mach 2.6 in less than 2 seconds. But the Vilkha-M wasn't following a standard ballistic arc. At 10:41 p.m., its guidance computer initiated a programmed 17-degree lateral offset, altering the descent profile by more than 310 meters and invalidating the Tor battery's initial intercept geometry. A second pair of interceptors was immediately launched, but their radio command guidance struggled with the combined clutter of terrain, electromagnetic interference, and the missile's erratic vector shifts. Further south, a Pantsir S-1 unit attempted to acquire the target from 11.2 kilometers away. Its phased array radar cycled across 8 frequency groups, combating cross-interference from both friendly and hostile emissions. By the time a partial lock was achieved, the Vilkha-M had already dropped below 1,200 meters, entering a zone where clutter from low ridges made radar resolution increasingly difficult. The final line of defense, a ZSU-23 for Shilka, deployed on the northern perimeter, tracked the target manually for 3.4 seconds, unleashing a burst of nearly 290 rounds. The missile tore through the pattern untouched, its trajectory stabilized by inertial sensors, correcting deviations down to 0.18 degrees per hour. By 10:42 p.m., the lead Vilkha-M had breached every defensive layer and was plunging toward the depot. Next came the moment none of the defenders were prepared for. At 10:49 p.m., the lead Vilkha-M missile crested the final ridge just 2.9 kilometers west of the depot. Its radar altimeter registered the warehouse roof at 5.4 meters below, activating the terminal fusing sequence. Traveling at 1,080 meters per second, the missile plunged into the eastern building, penetrating the sheet metal exterior before the 170-kilogram warhead detonated on contact. The blast produced an overpressure wave exceeding 12 bar, instantly collapsing the wall along a 27-meter section. Inside, stacked crates of 152mm artillery shells, arranged in columns nearly 4.2 meters high, absorbed the shock. Temperature inside the impact chamber surged beyond 2,900 degrees Celsius, igniting propellant bags stored in secondary racks. Within 0.32 seconds, the first secondary explosion ruptured wooden cladding and sent shrapnel ricocheting through the aisles. A rolling flash swept across the central corridor as 15 shells cooked off sequentially. At 10:49 p.m., the second Vilkha-M struck the northern facility. Its warhead punched through reinforced roofing rated for 120mm impact resistance before detonating above pallets of 122mm BM-21 Grad rockets. 6 rockets ignited almost simultaneously, their combined pressure lifting a 16-ton roof panel nearly 2.3 meters off its supports, before sending it crashing back in fragmented sheets. The third missile approached from the west at 10:50 p.m., impacting a warehouse that stored mixed-lot munitions, aging 9 M22U rocket bodies, sub-munition canisters, and several stacks of fuel charges. The immediate detonation ruptured multiple containers, creating a spray of burning propellant across the loading yard. Steel shelving collapsed inward as sub-munitions popped within their casings, generating a staccato chain of internal bursts. By 10:51 p.m., 3 separate fires were expanding across the depot. Each blaze fed the next, forming a combined thermal plume visible more than 12 kilometers away. The defensive perimeter's alarms blared continuously, but personnel had already realized the truth. Containment was no longer possible. What followed in the next minutes would push the facility past the threshold of survivability. By 10:51 p.m., the fires inside the depot had merged into a single thermal mass. The temperature at the core of the blaze surpassed 1,950 degrees Celsius, hot enough to compromise steel supports in the western storage halls. Ammunition handlers sprinted for hardened shelters, but the pace of internal detonations made movement across the yard nearly impossible. At 10:52 p.m., the fourth Vilkha-M reached its programmed aim point. The missile no longer found an intact structure, only a swirling field of flames and debris. Its high explosive warhead, intended for a reinforced warehouse, detonated amid the inferno, intensifying the thermal updraft and propelling fragments more than 310 meters across the compound. The fire then reached the depot's most volatile holdings: storage racks containing 5 V-55 series SA-10 missile bodies, each carrying over 130 kilograms of energetic material. At 10:53 p.m., one missile ignited, launching horizontally before disintegrating against a retaining wall. A second missile followed 6 seconds later, creating a plume visible from 3.5 kilometers away. The ground shock peaked at 10:55 p.m. when an underground vault containing 300mm Smerch rocket modules succumbed to the rising heat. The resulting detonation carved a crater nearly 38 meters wide and scattered metallic fragments across adjacent access roads. By 11:10 p.m., the depot had ceased to resemble a functioning military site. 4 warehouses had collapsed, and conservative estimates indicated that 2,800 to 3,100 tons of ammunition had been rendered unusable. Operationally, the loss equaled nearly 3 weeks of Russian artillery capacity along that sector, forcing rapid redistribution, increased transit exposure, and a ripple of logistical strain across multiple brigades. The strategic objective had been met. The battlefield balance, at least for now, had shifted. When the fires finally dimmed after 11:10 p.m., nothing remained of the depot but a warped skeleton of metal and a field of embers stretching across the loading yards. 4 warehouses gone, thousands of tons of stored munitions eliminated, and a front line that for the first time in weeks fell silent long enough for Ukrainian units to reposition with confidence. The Vilkha-M crew had survived only because they chose to launch faster than their enemy could react. pushing their system, their timing, and their luck to the absolute edge. Their strike didn't just destroy a target, it forced Russian logistics into emergency redistribution and created a ripple that shaped the next phase of the conflict. Now, I want to hear from you. If you were commanding this mission, what part of the operation impressed you the most? The timing, the precision, or the ability to survive under pressure? Share your thoughts below.